This is Brandon Despia. Thank you so much for watching the channel and having conversations with me about branded Despia and the Draco Tail variant. We just got the new ban list, and with Doom of Dimensions on the way, a whole new exciting world for branded and Draco Tail is about to be upon us. The reason I'm making this video today is to react to another video. I recently did one reacting to a video by Raul TCG, and that was very fun, so I decided to do it again. Today's video is from Chixalicious. The title of the video is The Harsh Truth About Draco Tail, a Yu-Gi-Oh deck with no real solutions. Now, you and I know that that is incorrect, but what we're going to do is listen to his opinions and his thoughts on why Draco Tail seems to have issues, and see if we can't use counter arguments to talk about why the answer might be branded. As a side note, it is to me approaching a certain level of stubbornness that we aren't seeing more people talk about using more branded cards in Draco Tail to fix many of his issues. In fact, I do have a video on my channel that kind of goes through some of the reasons why branded fixes Draco Tail's weaknesses. However, there may be some concerns that I haven't addressed that may be in this video, so let's see what he has to say and give it the respect it deserves. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications so you can come back whenever I have another TED Talk about branded. And with that out of the way, let's begin the video.
A lot of people are calling this format a triangle format, where Yummy is supposed to be Vanquish Soul Canine, Vanquish Soul Canine is supposed to be Draco Tail, and Draco Tail is supposed to be Yummy. While in theory a lot of that
essentially
is true,
what they're
there
saying.
are a lot of nuances to the format that people are kind of glossing over. For example, out of the 3 decks, Draco Tail was expected to be the worst, and then it kind of caught people by surprise by being much better than it was considered to be. For example, the spell cards are extremely powerful.
In my personal opinion, a big reason why the popularity of Draco Tail, or at least it got more respect, and I don't want to be too mean about it, but a huge part of it was the fact that Jesse Cotton did well and publicized his build. There is one minor issue with this that I might bring up later, but let's continue the video.
And they break boards like no other cards in the game. However, the deck has a glaring issue that's keeping it from being one of the best decks in the format. Its end board is way too fair, and it loses to way too many hand traps. I've
heard the same thing, that the deck is way too fair. Another way you might hear it being said is that it has a very low to the ground strategy, which is a very nice way of saying the deck is not good enough in terms of making its end board, which is typically why many people have resolved themselves to use hand traps to cover up those bases. There is a few issues with that. One thing in particular is that hand traps don't do nearly enough in this format against certain decks like K9, and in fact it enables it even further. You're kind of playing into it even more with a deck full of 20 hand traps, you know.
On the positive side, the deck can be played in like a million different ways.
True.
Right now, it seems like the most
this is probably its greatest advantage
version of the deck is pure, where you just play the Draco Tail engine with a bunch of hand traps. And
I disagree. I believe it's the most popular version, and this is one of the things I wanted to say earlier. It's one of the most popular ways to play it because we're seeing people essentially co-opt Jesse Cotton's list, for better or for worse. It is a successful list. It is a good list. And when you have a pilot as good as him, on top of that, you're going to experience success. But I do not believe that is the best way to play Draco Tail verbatim.
Sometimes including Shadal cards or Partizia, for example, King of the Swamp. So I want to talk about a few of those choices and why none of those actually solve the issue with the deck. So
by themselves, no. I find it, and I've mentioned this in the video before, I find it very curious that that people use Cartesia in their decks. It's almost like they're skirting around the answer for some really stubborn reason. Cartesia wants to be used with albaz. It's in the lore and it's in the card effect. It literally wants albaz to be somewhere in the graveyard or on the field, and then it special summons itself for free. That should just be a red flag right there, or that should be an obvious. Well, it should be obvious to most people you should have albaz somewhere in rotation to maximize the use of this card. Otherwise, it's just a normal summon that could clog over your other normal summons like your Lucius and your Lulu.
But for example, the deck loses to hand traps, but more specifically, the silver bullet for this deck is Retaliating Save. The deck is not good under Macrocosmos effects.
Yeah, that's why Herald of the Arclight is probably one of the reasons why it's getting a restriction, and I think it helps the Draco Tail a lot. If they're able to force its negation, they don't have to worry about it anymore. So this is one of the reasons why branded Draco Tail is a superior version to pure Draco Tail. One of the reasons. It's because it is less vulnerable to Macrocosmos related effects. Because branded branded does not only gain value from cards if they're sent to the graveyard, they have cards that gain value when banished, namely Tri-Brigade Mercurier, Despia Tragedy, and Ad Libitum of Despia. Those three cards, if you run those in a Draco Tail deck, allow you to play through a lot of what Macrocosmos effects can do to you, gain advantage, and enforce them to deal with that threat, for example. Moving on.
Because you only get value out of the monsters that you fuse with if they go to the graveyard. So once they're banished, the only way to put them back in the deck is with the trap cards. Imperm Veiler on Arthalion is a huge choke point for the deck. The deck plays a card advantage battle with your opponent. You need the Arthalion to resolve to add back more cards from your graveyard.
Yes.
If that gets interacted with and you're left with one card, you're pretty much guaranteed to lose on the spot.
Okay, so he brings up another interesting thing. Imperm and Veiler, if you're playing pure Draco Tail, obviously stopping the Arthalion from doing his thing is the most important way to beat it. One way you can beat it is having some way to make it dodge that type of negation. There are a few ways you can do it in engine. Obviously, Draco Tail Horn can do it if you're able to set it up first. But if you're going first, you can't do that. Another way is through Phymena. If you have Phymena in your hand and your opponent tries to Impermaveiler it, you do have the ability to use Phymena to fuse away the Arthalion to make something else and then have it dodge. This will lower your end board even further because that Phymena was going to go somewhere else, right? It was going to be utilized elsewhere. However, if you are running Cartesia, if you're running the branded engine, you not only have access to cards like Cartesia, you also have cards like branded in red, which can be used to quick fuse and dodge that kind of negation as well. If you are a Draco Tail deck that wants to run Cartesia, this is one of the major selling points of running it. Besides having another monster another way to fuse, that is also a monster, right? So once again, the branded engine proving its usefulness even in that type of scenario that he's being concerned about.
If they Asher Katu, that feels incredibly bad when you go second, and
it does. It also feels really bad for them if you're running branded Draco Tail, because now they don't have Ash Blossom for your two branded fusions, and which makes a much more ridiculous end board. Branded Fusion's still a very ridiculous card, and with the ban list being the way it is now, if they know you're running a branded Draco Tail hybrid, your opponent is extremely incentivized to hold any Ash Blossoms specifically for branded fusion, which means you're going to be getting your Draco Tail stuff anyway, number one. And if they are foolish enough to Ash your Ketu or your Rahu, despite knowing you have the branded engine in your deck, then they are risking getting blown out and losing on the spot themselves.
makes things way more difficult. So how do cards like Cartesia, King of the Swamp, Edge of Chain, the Shaddoll cards, Primi cards, Magistus cards fix this?
It doesn't. None of these cards on their own fix the issues. It just makes what they do even better. I don't know much about Crowley. I never used it in particular. However, I do like this engine a little bit, but it doesn't. It just supports what Draco Tail's already doing by giving it a special summon into a fusion that lets them keep their normal summon, right? So that's a really good one in terms of having an engine that you can, bait hand traps with or go into a fusion without using your normal summon. I'm not sure how you're looking for this though in the build. I have to look more into it. Shaddolls, I don't know how you're looking for Shaddolls. Like, I wish there was a way you can get this more easily instead of just hoping you have it along with a Phimina early on or something like that, especially when you're going second. Edge of Chain, I actually ended up taking this out of my deck. I do like the prospect of going into a Guardian Chimera that cannot be messed with. However, I might talk. We'll probably go into this further, but I do have an alternative to Edge of Chain that is in some ways better. I like King of the Swamp, but I just feel like if you're not running Dragoon, you're better off running the Edge Imp package anyway. And then Primite Dragon Ether, the Primite engine, like, again, you're fighting with normal summons again. I love this engine, but now you're fighting with your normal summons. And if there was a way to special summon this and get its effect, I would be down. But there isn't. So that's really the main issue with that. But let's see what he says.
This issue with the deck. Every solution is fake, or it just feels incredibly bad. For example, you're changing your normal summon from Lucius to Cartesia. You get to play around Retaliancy, sure. However, the spells are starters, and because even Ketsu, when you go first, includes an effective special summon, they can just give you the Retaliating Sea right there, and then you're kind of cooked. Normal.
Wow. These Retaliating Sea, that's the Macrocosmos effect. This summon this way while face up on the field. Any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. Like I said, you can kind of ignore that with your branded cards. So at least you have an option to do that. When Shifter was at 3, Branded had a line that let them go into a lot of stuff even through Shifter. So just another point for Branded right there.
Summoning a card that says it should special summon itself for free in the deck that it's meant to be played in feels incredibly bad. And
that's because it is bad in many ways. Great card. It really wants albaz in rotation somewhere. And if you're not willing to run albaz in your deck to make better use of your Cartesia, or at least run fusion deployment in your Draco Tail deck, I'm going to be honest with you. This may be a hot take. You should probably take out the Cartesia, because you're just making it easier to have too many normal summons in your hand. Special summon Cartesia, normal summon Lucius is what you really want, or Lucius / Malulu, right? If you don't have an ability to do that, I question sometimes why you're running Cartesia, if it outside of because Jesse Cotton said so, or because Jesse Cotton did it, is more what I wanted to say. And this isn't any type of criticism of Jesse himself or anything like that. Lord knows he's a better duelist than I. But you would imagine that even Jesse would take that into account when deciding to put that into the deck. And I don't think people do that when they put Cartesia in their Draco Tail deck. They're just doing it because Jesse did it. And that's not enough. You have to know why and know how to play around it and know what to do in those situations where you have too many normal summons in your hand, and know an engine way to mitigate that or get around it.
You're very limited with extenders in the deck. A lot of the hand traps you can't really fuse with if you don't have another Draco Tail name. You also have the Edge.
Okay, going back to what he said before about Cartesia. He said another problem with Cartesia lies in the fact that there are a number of hand traps, for example, that you will use in the Draco Tail pure list that are not lights or darks or spellcaster or dragons, right? But most particularly light or dark. which means if you do not have a DracoTail monster, Cartesia is doing nothing for you, typically. One of the best fusion monsters that involve Cartesia is Granguignol. It's just such a great card, utility-wise, and it gives you so much. And when you don't run branded cards with Cartesia, you lose access to a very, very powerful fusion monster that gives you so many things. It also draws the attention of so many hand traps. They have to imperm. They may feel the need to imperm Veiler the Granguignol. The next turn, if they special summon from the hand or through a monster's effect, now they have to Ash Blossom the Granguignol so it doesn't get the Quem, which sends the Albaz, which now if they go into a extra deck monster, now they're under the threat of a Mirage potentially showing up. See, like, just the presence of, and Granguignol is anti-nib if you have the branded cards in there too, because they nib you, you get a Quem, you get all this other good stuff. You get to set up a very good board post nib. You lose access to all of this stuff without the branded engine, or at least having access to Granguignol in some type of like very small version of Quem and Albaz to go behind it, right? So there's that. Plus, if you're not a fan of the Canine cards, if you play Granguignol and they make Izuna, then Granguignol's gonna pop off and get Quem and put Albaz in the graveyard, and now they're under the threat of having whatever monster they make get fused away, or they're forced to use the negation if they go into something like a Ripper, or they go into something like a Nash Knight, right?
Package, which like is really good value. However, they're fiends, so you can't actually use them for the limited card pool in the extra deck that you can make in this deck.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I took out the Edge in package. I like making the Guardian Chimera with Poly. That was really cool. However, I liked running Secretarion, and in some versions I was trying to run Mysterion, and those fiend monsters don't help a lot at all.
It feels incredibly bad. In addition to that, the other cards that are being played in the deck, like the Shaddolls and the King of the Swamp and Fenrir and stuff like that, they're not actually like real pushes for the most part. The King of the Swamp still plays into Retaliating Sea. Obviously,
well, I mean, it's those cards support the low to the ground build. Well, you made a point to say that the deck is too fair, aka low to the ground. It doesn't have high enough ceiling for your liking. And those like stuff like Fenrir helps with that, but if you want a higher end board, they aren't going to help you at all. They just facilitate the same type of board.
Honestly, Poly into Guardian Chimera I think is actually one of the better interruptions the deck can make. Because one, it's non-target pop, which is pretty good against Yomi, and also it draws you cards, which is really important in the deck.
Yeah, no one like non-target popping, non-target monster effects that deal with your opponent's board are really, really good in this format. It's almost like you should run Mirror Jade. Again, it seems to always go back to branded. Mirror Jade's one of the most broken fusion monsters in existence, and this, I just feel like you have the ability to have access to it, and you don't want to use it for some reason, which, that's up to you. But it's non-target removal. It gives you access to a very semi-generic super poly when you use Albaz to fuse with any of their extra deck monsters. It's relatively generic materials if you think about it. The really only thing you need is Albaz. You get a non-target banish, and if they get rid of it, you get a Raigeki out of it. And the monsters you are using to banish sets up your grind game and recursion. It does way too much for how easy it is to summon. So, when you hear stuff like that, when you hear people talk about cards that have overloaded abilities, and them not wanting to use it for some reason, by simply adding an Albaz and just running it off the seals at the very least, you wonder what's really going on here sometimes.
that you get your hand advantage back. However, that being said, you need to keep cards in your hand to play the game with this deck, which is why like the deck's structure kind of conflicts with itself, because you're incentivized to play monster interruptions as hand traps, and yet you have to deplete your hand resources, which is integral to the strategy.
This is why you want cards that can replace themselves or give you advantage later on in the turn or the future turn, right? And Branded gives you a lot of those cards. Cartesia goes back to your hand at the end of the turn if a fusion monster goes to the graveyard. So it basically pays for itself. We talked already about Despia and Tragedy. You use as a fusion material, it gets you a card to replace itself from the deck. And in the next turn, you can banish it to replenish a branded spell or trap from the graveyard. Super valuable, especially if you're running cards like Branded in white, which I was going to bring this up. I almost forgot to bring this up, but one of the reasons why I decided not to go with the Edge In package is because running something like 2 to 3 Tragedy with a Branded in white effectively does something similar to what an Edge In package does, but since it's an engine, it's more searchable and more consistent. You know, as long as I use a dragon, I can make Guardian Chimera with Branded in white. You know, maybe the Guardian Chimera is targetable, of course, but the advantage is this engine is searchable. I can make this, I can find this engine through other cards. With the Edge In package, I'm essentially waiting to draw it. If I draw it, good, but there will be games where you never ever see it, potentially, right? That's totally possible. That's just my personal opinion on it. That's why I like to run 2 to 3 Tragedy with an ad libitum as my Despia package, along with the 1 Quem. Every single one of those cards gives you back cards when something happens, right? So that mitigates the card dumping that you're going to be doing when you're fusing away Draco Tail monsters to make something like Arthalion or anything else, really.
Artesia is a good card for this, as well as Primite Ether Barrel, because those cards add themselves back. Ether Barrel is like a little bit worse because you have to wait to your own standby phase, but the problem with that I see is that for those effects to resolve in this deck, you have to already be playing the game to a point where like you're probably just winning. So
yeah, it feels kind of when more. Yeah, I was just about to say, yeah. And that's, you know, although I don't think it's that particular part about the Primite engine is that bad. I think the main issue is the normal summon conflict.
They're also just more normal summons.
They're
not
there
like
you
genuine
go.
pushes. Ending on Seal's Pass now is like fine, but it's also just like not great. If you look at the Yummy
it's
board,
okay.
It's still better than the Draco Tail on board, and they're like less interactable with. Like we're
exactly. Man, hold on. You if you're going to show Draco Tail, Horn, and Flame, you gotta get the different. Don't show the rare version, man. Come on.
Setting 2 traps. They have Ash, potentially Bell. They have Purge. They have Imperm.
Yeah, they're running a lot of Ash and Bell now. Like especially Bell is because picking up a lot more because of Draco Tail and other cards too, of course. And I'm saying, like, you want a deck that can push really hard and force so much interaction. Like I can Branded Fusion, they Ash it, then I can go High Spirit, still play under something like a Herald of the Arclight, get advantage during the end phase by getting albaz to fuse away with their Herald, or at least force the negation. And now they have to use their Bell to deal with other effects. And now I'm eating away their hand traps, and I still haven't even used my Draco Tail cards. Typically in a 40 card deck, your opponent, the way most decks are built, they're expecting to have 2 hand traps at least, along with a 2 starters or 1 starter and 2 extra pushes or extenders beyond that. That's typically what they try to calculate their decks to do. So in that regard, if you can push through 2 hand traps very easily, which Branded can very easily do, in terms of eating up 2 hand traps, then I think that makes it so much better for your Draco Tail to get what it needs done. But now you're having cards like Albaz backing you up with your Phimina fusions, for example. So, yeah.
They have answers to a lot of your cards. It feels really like an uphill battle to play against decks with a lot of non-engine space like that. When you just get like hand trap, it feels incredibly bad, which can be said about a lot of the decks in the format. I think it's just super true for DracoTail because it's felt like you're not really incentivized to go first post side. A lot of the time I felt like just playing.
I've heard that people have been going second against Yummy. No, not Yummy, but opting to go second a lot more, which makes sense because now your Ketu is even more powerful. I just don't prefer that. If I can go first, I'm going to go first. I understand what he's saying, and it makes sense. But he's also not running branded. So when I run branded, my turn 1 is ridiculous. If they don't do anything, they just auto lose in many situations. They just put up too much. So they have to use all these hand traps to deal with it, right? So just keep that in mind. I just think your turn 1s are just so much better. So there's no uninterrupted Brandon board that is considered fair, quote unquote. Let's put it that way, unless you make huge mistakes.
Playing the going second version would just be better for the deck because your spell cards are insane at breaking boards, and in that scenario where you're going second, I think a lot of the cards that people are choosing to play in their deck make more sense. The Shaddoll cards make more sense, King of the Swamp makes more sense. I think all that being...
Yeah, because if you're going to run Shaddoll cards, like there is going to be this temptation to run Shaddoll Fusion, which I love that card, but it's better going second.
Said, DracoTail is
much
still
better.
A really good deck. However, I don't think those cards fix the issue with the deck, which leads me to the cards that I think fix most of the issues with the deck. The branded DracoTail deck is...
Okay, so he does bring it up here. Okay, so he does know what he's talking about, like in regard, or at least he's considered it. It feels like some people still don't want to give it the credit it is due credit. Not saying that this is like, you know, going to solve everything 100% of the time, but this is probably the best variant of DracoTail if you're trying to address the issue of hand tap trap resilience and a more potent end board going first.
A bunch of good cards, and Branded Fusion is genuinely the only way to bridge one engine to the DracoTail engine. The Despia cards and the branded cards are actually fairly good under die-fi effects, so you're not super concerned about Herald. The deck is way better at going first. If you want to play like the Ito lock or the Puppet lock, whatever you want to call it, you can, but you don't technically have to. You can just play a bunch of good cards in your extra deck. You have like much more follow-up if you're playing cards like Fusion Deployment and you already have a DracoTail.
Wow, he's bringing all of it up.
It's easier for free, and then your Arthelion's protected under Imperm.
That's amazing. This guy, you know what, man? Subscribe. I apologize for doubting you. I don't know. I didn't know when I watched this video if you were gonna bring that up or not. But it sounds like you kind of know the answer already. Again, no one here is saying that that branded is perfect and that there won't be things you have to adjust, or that maybe there isn't there isn't something that there isn't another issue that you have to figure out. Like, for example, if you run branded DracoTail, you're not going to have a lot of room for hand traps now, are you? So you're more limited in what hand traps you do pick, and they might get sent to the sideboard most likely. But so far, he's spitting.
The deck has probably the best synergy out of any of the other variants, but that deck has like one huge glaring weakness. Paradise Smasher exists at the moment.
Oh, not anymore. Not anymore. And I also want to say that even if it did, because branded has access to cards that can play on your opponent's turn, under Paradise Smasher, you can set up cards like branded in red, branded opening, branded in high spirits, with something like a Cartesia or a Quim on the board, and still be able to play the game. It isn't an instant loss because those cards exist in your deck, right? So I can use Ketu, for example, to just get a Phimina, get it to my hand, set up my board with these quick play spells, and then go right into it. Like I could even, if for example, let's say you run branded banishment, like if you have it in your hand for some reason, you can probably find a way to dump one of your Despian monsters, put it in the graveyard, then use your Branded Banishment to resurrect it, and then take their Paradise Smasher, make a Coritis or something like that. So I'm just expressing opportunities to succeed through Smasher in scenarios where people would just say game 2, right? Because for many people, the game is just over when Paradise Smasher is live. And at least having a chance to it not automatically be a game loss is a major improvement. But don't have to worry about it anymore now, do we?
And basically, you're playing a deck with no hand traps. If your opponent sees you have a deck with no hand trap, they can go, here's my Paradise Smasher, you lose on the spot. Overall,
like I said before, I disagree with that, but now it's banned, so we don't have to worry about it. Hopefully he makes a follow-up to this. I would like to see him have a follow-up video to this.
Long tournament, I don't think it's a smart decision to play that deck because you're going to see Vanquish Soul K9. But I think that the branded version.
I personally think branded Draco Tail has a good matchup against VS K9. In my experience, it's a slog fest. It's a huge grind fest, and it really is a very technical game, technical matchup. It is not an auto loss, however. I really don't think so. And in some ways, the hand traps, not using a lot of hand traps, kind of helps, because now you have options that can let you play against your opponent's board and not trigger K9 Izuna, right? So
version solves a lot of the issues with the deck compared to any of the other ones, and that's why I'm not convinced you can play a deck without any hand traps in this format at the moment.
I agree and disagree. Branded Draco Tail can. Absolutely. There's just too much in-engine between both of them combined to break pretty much any board in the game right now, especially with the nerfs to Malice, Ryzeal, Yummy, and K9 VS. And that's even taking into consideration the support they're going to be getting in Doom of Dimensions. However, I'm not opposed to running hand traps like the Charmies or Nibiru. I think you're pretty much, if you're going to run like a 60-card branded Draco Tail deck, for example, you really want to resign yourself to really only running like the huge, really big impact hand traps. And that's it. Especially if they're lights or darks, or can be, or they can synergize with high spirits. That's really what you want to do there. I wouldn't run Ash. Ash doesn't do enough. It's good, but it's not as good as it could be. It's too easy to go through to just play through Ash with a lot of these decks. Nib, people can play around Nib, but it does soften their board up a little bit. And if worst case scenario, you can use it as a light monster for fusion material because of the branded engine. Fool Loss, nothing to say there. Definitely run Fool Loss no matter what list you're playing, main deck or side. I'm currently running it in this side right now, but and same thing with Perulia. Outside of those three, and maybe Droll and Lockbird, it is a spellcaster, so you can use it with high spirits, and there is opportunity. There is a strong chance we might be seeing more Mitsurugi after this ban list. So those are the viable hand traps I think you can use with branded in main or side. Outside of that, I wouldn't really mess with the other ones. Actually, there is a. Let me fix that. There is a. You can make an argument for Veiler, but only if you're, in my opinion, only if you're running in a Draco Tail branded build. Only, in my opinion, if you are running Albion the Sanctifier Dragon and multiple copies of, like 2 to 3 copies of Arthalion. Okay, that's my personal opinion.
And it's probably going to be that way for a long time. The one last point I wanted to make about this deck is that you can do like fairly unfair things with it.
Yeah.
You can just turn 0 window your opponent. Sometimes it feels really broken, and other times it's like very clearly not the correct decision to do. And Winda is like a fairly outable card, as well as Dragoon being a fairly outable.
I agree with that. Non-targeting effects, we'll deal with them. One of my main issues with the Shaddoll package that people were running is that they weren't running Schism. If you're going to run Cartesia, the best way to run Shaddoll's, in my opinion, is to have at least one copy of Schism with an app clone in the extra deck, because what that lets you do, it lets you hide the window to when you absolutely need it, and not have your opponent have access to stopping it immediately with cards like Dark Ruler No More. If I put out a if I go first, for example, and I make a window, or if I have an opportunity to make a window, then my opponent still has an opportunity to do something with it, like bounce it, banish it, non-targeting, or whatever it wants they want to do with it. Use Dark Ruler No More, drop it, stuff like that. But with the trap, now I have something I can use to hold it back until I feel like I have to use it, or when it's the right time, right? And that's my personal opinion. Oh, by the way, people are really liking Secretarion Dragon. I don't know why people aren't running Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. It's arguably more broken. It does similar things in terms of being able to reuse resources. We talked about Draco Tail having an issue with losing resources because they're constantly dumping it for Arthalion and things of that nature. Well, this card, this card is, people have been asking for this card, Albion the Sanctifier, to get banned. Either they were lying and they didn't mean it, or it's something else, right? Because this card is still busted right now. It should totally be used.
Card. If I'm ever 5 mana,
can't be targeted, by the way.
I'm pretty much always making Arthalion despite having Shaddoll Beast in my hand or not, because you just get so much more value that way than doing Winda.
That's a fair statement.
Draco Tail is still one of my favorite decks of the format. I still have the cards. I'd love to play it, but in terms of bringing it to a tournament and like wanting to succeed with it, I think it's a pretty bad decision. You're pretty much guaranteed to just get hand trapped out the game, and when you go first, half your end board loses to hand traps anyway. So the hand traps they draw for turn are still going to be good against you. I don't think that there's really any incentive to play this deck if you look at it from a competitive standpoint at the moment. The only advantage I see is that all the cards are extremely high quality, but like I said, it loses to way too much in my opinion, and I don't think there's a genuine solution to this deck.
I think you just answered your own question in the video. I do think the best version of Draco Tail will be a version that runs branded cards, whether people like it or not. The question at this point is how much of those cards you're running. And if you're running a 40 card deck, 50, 60, those are the questions that need to be answered and explored. And I think we'll figure out that answer once Doom of Dimensions come out and Frixel's available along with the 2 branded fusion. That's going to be the key to what Draco Tail does in this format, because in terms of support, the other decks are getting arguably better quality support. And we're just getting Frixel, but we're also getting branded fusion to make up for that. So that's really the question. Maybe this is just me, but I feel like by listening to him talk, he kind of has like a little bit of maybe it's just the way he's explaining it, but I feel like he's a little disappointed in what Draco Tail is doing right now, despite the fact that he really loves the deck. And I hope he looks back into it and makes another follow-up video after the ban list is live. And we get, especially when we get Doom of Dimensions, I want to see if his tune changed a little bit. I think that'll be it for the video. It was a good video. I really appreciated it. But I did want to talk about it with you guys. And just once again, I don't feel like hopefully this doesn't come across this way. I don't want people to feel like I'm just saying this just because I'm a branded stan. And I just think, I just sing all praises branded, right? It's not one of the top decks for a reason, and and maybe one of those reasons is because it's just a difficult deck to play branded anyways. But I do truly believe, if you are worried about hand trap resilience, if you are worried about the deck having a subpar end board in terms of its power level, you gotta run the branded cards. How many of them you run is up to you and your deck building skills. And with that, I'll leave you to it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Even subscribe to Chixalicious as well. It was a good video. Thank you for your time and enjoy your day.